Oh, David, how are you today?
I am excellent, Brian. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. Welcome to our chat here today. I'm excited to talk to you and excited to share what you know and what you've learned over the years with our listeners and viewers. I've been very fortunate to been exposed to David for a while now. David is the CEO and founder of CultureWise, and you'll find out very soon why. It'll be very obvious why he does that. He's also 2021 Vistage Speaker of the Year, and I had him speak to one of our CEO groups recently, and he knocked it out of the ballpark. And I thought it'd be great to do a video interview and share with you some of the learnings from David that he learned throughout his career. This isn't theoretical. David did all this and built his company based on these principles, and I'm excited to learn more about them today and share them with you. So welcome, David.
Well, thanks. It'll be fun to share.
You got it. Hey, let me jump in first with this question, if I may. I think everyone and every CEO and every business recognizes their culture is important, um, but they don't really have a good handle. But most of them don't have a good handle about how to deliberately build that culture. Why do you think that is? How do you think we got there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Brian. And I'll start that answer by sharing. When I talk to a Vistage group like I spoke to yours, I have a variety of different ways that I start that talk. And one of the ways I used to start it is I would have a group of CEOs and I'd ask them on a 1 to 5 scale, in terms of its importance to the bottom line, where do you think culture rates? With 1 being it's not that big a deal, 5 is no, it's a significant contributor to the bottom line. And I'll go around the room and I'll ask everybody, and almost everybody gives it a 5. And then I'll ask them, so let me ask you this. How many of you have some kind of a written, documented strategic plan that identifies this year's goals, priorities, initiatives? What are you trying to accomplish as a company this year? And most of them will raise their hand. And I'll ask them, so how many of you have some kind of a documented sales plan, let's say, that identifies your targets and quotas and goals? How are you going to hit your sales number? And most of them will raise their hand, and I'll ask them, so
Yeah.
how many of you have some kind of financial plan? You're not running your company without a budget or a forecast, and they all have that, of course. And I say, so how many of you have some kind of a written, documented culture plan for how you're driving the culture of your organization? Almost nobody. And I'll say to them, well, let me see. I just want to see how I understand this. You just told me this was a 5 in terms of its impact on your bottom line. This isn't fluff. This is your bottom line. And you're just winging it, hoping it's just going to work out on its own. I mean, that would be like saying that budget or forecast, overrated. We don't need that stuff. That's just passe. And if we didn't have a budget or a forecast, that doesn't mean we wouldn't be trying to generate as much revenue as we could, or doesn't mean that we wouldn't be trying to manage our expenses intelligently. But the chances of our hitting our numbers would be a heck of a lot better if we had some plan for it than if we were just winging it. And they all recognized it. And then I asked them the question you just asked me. So why don't we? And what I hear most frequently, Brian, is one, many of them never thought about it that way. They've just never thought of culture as a systematic process. Instead, they think of culture as just like a feeling. Well, you can't have a plan around a feeling. And so part of it is that. Part of it is that when they went to business school, they learned about quote unquote hardcore business things, things that we can measure, things that are concrete. And so it's easier to talk about our sales numbers or our finances than it is to talk about our people. That's just kind of squishy for people. So we gravitate to things that we're more comfortable with, that we can measure, that we can get our arms around. And so most have just never thought about this in as systematic a way as I suggest they ought to.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that explanation. I confess when I was running my companies, I would have answered those questions the exact same way.
Yeah, and most do. And yet, again, my point of view, as you know from my Vistage talk, is if we all agree that our culture is absolutely critical to the performance of our company, then my point of view is we should be as systematic about our culture as we are about our finances or our sales or our operations or other important parts of our company. And yet, to your point, very few people are. And they usually haven't even thought about it that way before, even though that makes totally logical sense.
David, one of the reasons that CEOs join Vistage, one of the reasons is because it's very isolating at the top, and
Mm.
everyone you talk to has at least a little bit of spin in the way they're presenting to you. And I like to joke that no one ever, when I was running my companies, no one ever came to me and said, yeah, Brian, I'm the problem. You should fire me, right? That never happened, right? But I also wonder, and that permeates every aspect of the business and the CEO's existence. And I feel like the culture that the CEO perceives the company to have and the culture the company actually has may be very different.
That's not unusual that, and I think honestly, even outside of Vistage, when you read that article in Inc. magazine or Fast Company or some other place, or and they talk about this amazing company, I got to tell you, I think most of that's the CEO's imagination of what his or her culture is.
Nice.
I suspect in most of those cases, if the author of that article interviewed the employees, they might not always say the same things that the CEO is fantasizing about his or her culture. So they're not always the same.
Yeah, it's a bit of clearly we all treat each other with respect because everybody certainly treats me with respect.
Exactly. Yeah. So it must be. Exactly.
So let's dive deep here. Let's get into it. How do you design a culture and a culture plan that's not just words on paper?
Yeah. So I organize the steps, Brian, to be systematic about building the culture around a framework that I've written several books about, that I talk about all the time. And it's a framework that I call the 8-step framework. 8 different things. If you do these 8 things, this is how you systematically create the culture that you really want in your company, and how you not just create it, but you embed it in everybody so that they work here. This is how we do things. So there are these 8 different steps. And while all of them are important, and otherwise I wouldn't have written about them, at the end of the day, if you just kind of cut to the chase, ultimately, my experience is that there are 2 of these 8 steps that actually drive a disproportionate amount of influence over people's success. If you do these 2 things well, you're going to be successful. And if you don't do these 2 things well, you won't be. And those 2 things are, I'll identify them here and we can take them one at a time. So they are, number 1, how we go about defining with enough clarity exactly what we want our culture to be. Now, this sounds really obvious, and it is obvious, because if we can't define with enough clarity what we're trying to build, how are we going to be able to build it very effectively? And yet, as obvious as that sounds, there are a lot of reasons that companies don't do this well, and I'll come back and go deeper. The second of those 2 steps, so first is defining with enough clarity what we want. The second is a concept that I call creating rituals. And creating rituals is a concept that enables us to take what we're doing, roll it out into our organizations, and have it be sustainable, because every organization struggles with sustaining things. We come up with great ideas, great initiatives, everybody's excited, and 3 months later, it just became another flavor of the month.
Right.
When we create rituals, it's what makes it sustainable. So let me just take those 2 concepts separately, and we'll go a little deeper on those. So when we talk about defining the culture, I make a very big deal in the language distinction between what I call values and what I call behaviors. So most of the companies you've ever worked with and been a part of love to talk about their core values, and they're on their website and they're on their walls. And they sound great, but they're very hard to really operationalize. So let me describe what the difference is and why this is so important. A value, in the way that I typically use the language, is normally some kind of an abstract concept. So examples of values, typical values, are things like quality, integrity, respect, you mentioned, loyalty, commitment, passion, safety. These are ideas, concepts. A behavior, in contrast, is an action. It's something I can see people doing. So some of the behaviors that I teach in my company, just as examples, so your listeners understand, is some of my behaviors are things like honor commitments. That's something you actually do. Practice blameless problem solving. Get clear on expectations. Be a fanatic about response time. Follow up on everything. Do what's best for the customer. These are actions that people do. So a value is an abstract idea, behavior is an action. The reason that this distinction is important, and not just a question of semantics, is that the problem with most companies, not all, but most companies' traditional looking set of core values is they sound great, they look wonderful on the website, but because they're so vague, they mean too many different things to different people, and they therefore become really hard to operationalize. Behaviors, though, because their actions are easier to teach and coach and guide and give people feedback about. It's very difficult to coach somebody about their core values, but I could coach them all day long about what I see them doing or not doing. So the first thing that I teach people is we've got to define our culture, not in terms of those big, lofty things, but in terms of the behaviors that you as a leadership team say, if we could get our people to do these things consistently, boy, we'd be amazing. And I call those behaviors, I just have a name from, they're just my own nomenclature. I call them fundamentals because they're fundamental to success. So that's the first step.
So give me another example, if you will. Thank you, David. Give me another example, if you will, of a vague value, and then translate it into a fundamental behavior.
So, I won't even necessarily translate. I'll just show you why it's not helpful and what we want to do instead. So, you mentioned before, having a respectful environment. We all think, I see many companies that will have a core value for respect. Sounds like a great idea. Mm-hmm. But what does that word mean? It means different things to different people. If you grew up in an inner city gang, your definition of what it looks like to respect somebody, or maybe even to diss them, could be completely different than what it means in your family. Or if you grew up in some parts of the country, using the language, I often use this example, those of your listeners who grew up in the South were probably taught that when they speak to an adult, you call them sir or ma'am. Do that in the Northeast. That's just weird. It has nothing to do with respect. We all just have different ideas of what this word means. So to simply say, well, one of our core values is respect, okay, I mean, it sounds good. I just don't know what I'd do with any of that. And that's true of most core values. Let me give you another example. If we have the value, let's say the value for commitment. Well, that sounds like a good thing. We should all be committed. Well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. How do I teach somebody that? But if I can instead talk about what I want to see them do, so I want people to practice blameless problem solving. Okay, well, that means something very specific. It means that when a problem happens, we're not blaming each other. Instead, we're solving it, we're learning from it, and we're incorporating process improvements based upon what we learned. I could teach people how to do that. I don't know how to teach people how to do passion or quality. Yeah, right. So actions are way easier to identify when people are doing it, coach them about it, teach them about it, operationalize it. And that's what makes behavior so powerful.
Good stuff.
So the first thing we've got to do then is we got to define this culture. What are we trying to build as a company? What is it? And define it in terms of a set of behaviors, or again, just my name it, I call them fundamentals. Now, once we have this set of fundamentals, okay, that's great. We got clarity. But we still have to get our people to do it. Unless we can get our people somehow living these things, it's not going to do anything great. We got a better list on the website than we had before, but that doesn't mean our people are living it. So how do we do that? We do that through this concept that I referred to a moment ago that I call creating rituals. So let me explain what that is and show you how this is important, how it's used. So a ritual is a routine, a behavior that you do over and over and over again until it becomes baked in. It just becomes part of how we operate here. So simple examples of rituals we're all familiar with is, think about before we start a ball game, we do the national anthem. When I was a kid in school, we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Some people say a prayer before they start a meal. People get up in the morning and they brush their teeth. They're just routines. They just become part of our life. And the reason that rituals are so important as a concept is that most human beings are not very good. In fact, we stink at sticking with things. Okay. We come up with all kinds of great ideas and we really mean it. We're intending to do it. And then life gets in the way.
Guilty.
Well, we all are. We all are. And it falls by the wayside. Well, when something becomes a ritual, it's not hard to do. You don't struggle to remember to brush your teeth in the morning, I hope. I might ask your wife that, but it just becomes part of our habit. It's just what we do every day. So the way we use that simple idea is that we take these fundamentals, these behaviors that I was describing, we roll them out to all of the employees in highly interactive, engaged work sessions. And then we begin to focus on one fundamental each week through a series of rituals. And I'll give you an example in just a moment to show you what I mean. So week number one, everybody in the company, in every department, every location, all week long is thinking about working on, focusing on, practicing fundamental number one. The week after that, everybody's focused on two. And the week after that, 3 and 4, and we cycle through them over and over and over again so that they become internalized. So here's a simple example. In my company and every one of our clients, every meeting that we have in our company this week, the first agenda item of the meeting is the fundamental of the week. And we spend the first 3 to 5 minutes talking about it. So to give you an example, in my company this week, my fundamental is one that we call speak straight. And speaking straight is about having honest, clear, direct conversations with each other in a way that actually helps to move the action forward. So it's not just dumping on people, it's having constructive conversations, but we're not avoiding the difficult conversations. We're going to have the hard conversations in a very clear, direct way. So that's my fundamental this week. Every meeting in my company, Zoom, in-person, management, project team, if there's a meeting going on in my company this week, every one of those meetings, the first thing we do is we spend a few minutes talking about speaking straight, what that means and how we practice it and what makes it hard to do sometimes. 3 to 5 minutes. We don't want to take over the meeting, but every meeting, the first thing we do is we talk about speaking straight. Next week, every meeting will start with next week's fundamental. And the week after that, that fundamental, and we just cycle through them. So that's an example of what I mean by a ritual. There are many rituals that companies create, but the concept here is that if we can define in really crystal clear terms those behaviors that drive success in your company, and then we can create this structured, systematic way through rituals to practice those behaviors over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, sooner or later, they're just going to become second nature to people, and they're going to become internalized, and they're going to become the way we actually operate this company. Right. That's the core concept. There are the 6 other steps that I referred to in that 8-step framework deal with things like, how do you hire people who are going to be a good fit for your culture? Right. How do you integrate them into the culture? How do you coach them, et cetera? But the core of it are these 2 very simple things that are very powerful. Define the behaviors, teach them over and over and over again through rituals, and you're going to be successful.
Nice. Let me ask 2 questions as a follow-up, David. One, I imagine there are times after you implement this that you as CEO, the people who work for you are going to be calling you out for violating the principles or the fundamentals, I should say. I assume that's happened to you in the meeting. Hey, you're blaming someone there, David.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would encourage that. I'd want them to do that. And I, when we roll this out, I often say to people, when we roll this out, life doesn't change the next day. It's not like, okay, sure, I used to blame people all the time and now I stopped it because we rolled it out. Yeah. I got to work at it. We've developed habits over our lifetime of not always doing these things. And so it takes time to practice them to get better and better. So I always warn employees, when we see each other, whether it's peer to peer, peer to boss, boss to direct report, when we see each other falling short, we're not using that as like a club to catch each other. See, I saw Brian, he wasn't doing it. It's not about catching people falling short. It's about coaching and supporting, helping each other to be this way more consistently. So if I see you not doing this, I'm going to say, hey, remember, one of our principles we practice here, Brian, is practicing blameless problem solving. So let's talk about what do we really need to do in this situation? So it's not, I caught you. It's let's remind each other and coach each other and support each other. Now, I will say just to add one thought to that, from a leadership perspective, as the CEO, sometimes the best examples of teaching are when I catch myself, when I fall short and I say, hey, you know what? I know we talk about blameless problem solving, but I got to tell you, I got myself all caught up in blame there, Brian. And I got to apologize. It's not what we're about here. I'm working on it, and I could use your support as I continue to work on that. Sometimes the best examples of leadership are when we fall short and own up to it and acknowledge that and ask for support as I work on it, because I'm setting the example that we're all a work in progress. Now, one caveat there, if we continually fail over and over and over again, at some point we lose credibility. So we can't
Yes.
just, keep falling short. But times when we do fall short, when we own it in a very humble way, are great examples of leadership to share with our team.
Thank you. And I would also say, I mean, for example, practice blameless problem solving. There are times when blame does need to be attributed, but that needs to be done deliberately, intentionally, in the correct format, in the correct venue, not just we're going to do it in the meeting ad hoc, right?
Yeah, although I would challenge that just a little bit. And I would say that practice, and every fundamental has layers of subtlety and nuance to it. So I can talk about them forever. And we can always keep teaching. But when I teach that, one of the things I like to bring up for people is I'll ask an audience, how do we practice blameless problem solving and at the same time hold people accountable, which is what you're
that's
raising.
kind of what I'm getting at. Yep.
Yes. So blameless problem solving doesn't mean it's okay to screw up all the time because we don't blame anybody. We have to hold people accountable. The distinction that I would draw there is that, and the way that I like to say this is, when a problem occurs, if the question we ask ourselves is, who screwed this up? That's a blame question.
Yeah, exactly.
If the question we ask ourselves is, where did our process or our system fall short? That's a process question. And let me give you a very simple example. If let's say that you sent out the wrong paperwork to one of our clients, and I come to you and say, Brian, what the heck were you thinking? Why did you send that wrong stuff out? If the only thing I'm interested in is who screwed this thing up, it's Brian. He's the guy that messed thing up, and I don't learn anything. But maybe the reason that you sent out the wrong paperwork is the client asked you for the wrong thing. Maybe another team member asked you to send out the wrong thing. Maybe it was filed in the wrong place. Maybe you didn't know. I mean, there could be any number of reasons for that to have taken place, none of which I would have ever learned if the only thing I was interested in is, who can I blame here?
Right.
So if the question I ask myself isn't who sent this thing out, but rather, how did the wrong paperwork get sent out? That how question is a process question and helps me understand the root cause of it and helps me go to a solution. So that's how I think of it, as not sometimes we got to blame somebody.
Yeah. I think that the nuance there was that there's certainly times that we have to hold people accountable.
Yes.
Right. When the systems and procedures are right, and it's just a lack of care, that's a different issue than a system
That's
issue,
a different
process issue. But
yes.
You can't, as you said, you can't jump to that. That's not, blaming someone doesn't actually solve the problem, and it doesn't help the culture.
Yeah.
That needs to be handled individually if someone just can't do their job or cares not to do their job.
Yes, exactly.
So these fundamentals, David, you've written these up. You've written up these very specific behavioral fundamentals for the people, and are they on the wall, or are they on the website, or where are these things?
Well, so every company has its own set of fundamentals, so my own fundamentals in my company are in lots of different places. So they're on my wrist. So every week I change.
What's that one say? That says speak straight, right?
It says speak straight. So I change it every week. So every week I change my wristband with my fundamental of the week. Our fundamentals are certainly on our website. I have a mouse pad with my fundamentals. I created this set of fundamentals in my first company. I'm in my home office right now, which you can't see. And I have actually large poster prints of some of my favorite fundamentals are on my home office walls right now. So when I created this in my first company, and that company, after I sold that company, they were moving to a new location. And so they said, hey, do you want any of these posters? I said, oh yeah, I'll take some of my favorite ones. So as I sit in my home office, I have Speak Straight. I have Honor Commitments. I have one that I call Practice A+ness as a way of life around me. So I've got a series of fundamentals posters around me. When I send out any email, I update my email signature each week, changes. And in my email signature, it has the fundamental of the week. So yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah, I will tell the viewers that David and I have known each other for a little while now. And when one of his principles is being a fanatic about response time.
That I am.
David's a fanatic about response time. You email David, you get a reply quickly. So I applaud you for that one.
Well, we have to live what we teach.
Yeah. Closing thoughts? What would you like people to take away from this?
Well, what I would say, Brian, is that, there's a quote that I shared with your Vistage group. It's in my last book that I talk about all the time, and I think it captures the essence of this thought. And the quote is that I say that good companies have good cultures by chance, but world-class companies have world-class cultures by design. And what I mean by that quote is when I say that good companies have good cultures by chance, if your listeners are good leaders, they're going to do most of the right stuff. They're going to hire good people. They're going to treat them well. They're going to have a decent culture. They're not going to fail. This isn't rocket science. But what I would tell you is that the best organizations understand just how important their culture is to success, and therefore they don't leave any of it to chance. It's just too important. Instead, they're incredibly intentional and purposeful and systematic about every aspect of how they drive their culture. None of it's left to chance. They go through a very systematic way to build that culture. And it's the difference between decent companies, good companies, and amazing ones. That the good companies, nice people, even by accident, I'll just be me and people will be around me enough and they'll figure it out and we'll have a decent culture. But if we really understand the driver that culture is over success and performance, we should not be leaving that to chance. We got to be a lot more systematic about it.
That's great stuff. Repeat that quote for me one time, please.
Good companies have good cultures by chance, but world-class companies have world-class cultures by design.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Final question, then I'll let you go.
Sure.
Someone's watching this. What are they thinking to themselves that should prompt them to say, boy, I should call Dave?
Well, I would say the people that we work with, Brian, are companies that are passionate about their culture. So most of the time, they're not dysfunctional. They have really good cultures, but they face certain challenges that have them concerned. One is maybe they're growing fast. We've always had a really good culture and we're growing like crazy. And I'm worried about how am I going to preserve that as we continue to grow. Sometimes it might be we've got a really good culture, but we've made an acquisition and we're worried about it getting diluted. Or it could be we have a good culture and we're worried that a lot of our people are working remotely or hybrid now. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to preserve that culture as we continue to grow. So if you've got a good culture, but you've never really been systematic about it, you really want to elevate the game and protect it as you continue to move on, then we should be talking.
That's great stuff. Yeah, I love the growth example. Every new person you bring into your company brings their old culture with them.
Well, they do. And again, when I think about that growth thing, what I would say is just picture this cycle. You've seen it in your own career. You've seen it with Vistage members. If a listener you've got 5, 10, 15, 20 people, you've been able to get away with your culture being mostly a result of your example. Your people are together, they're physically in one space, they see you every day, they take their cue from you. And that's been good enough to kind of get the culture out to people. But when you go from 20 people to 50 or 100 or 300, or maybe you have other locations, or maybe you made that acquisition, you're no longer present with everybody. You're not seeing the rest of your employees. And so your example isn't enough anymore. And if you don't have something systematic for how to institutionalize the things you've always taught, you're going to be at risk of losing it. And that's why people ought to be taking this on.
David, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Really appreciate your insights, and the beauty of culture by design is it puts another critically important aspect of the company onto a deliberate path rather than happen chance.
Yes. My pleasure. Great to be with you, Brian.
Thank you, David.